So my name is Andrew May. I'm the global brand manager for Cockburn's Port. I'm Irish originally, but I'm currently based in Porto in Portugal, where I've lived for probably the last 12 years or so. I sort of came to the drinks trade through a sort of a rather circuitous route. I studied and worked for several years as an archaeologist. And I think the way I found my way into drinks, I think, was through the sort of love of a place rather than necessarily a specific category or style or whatever. And I think, I found myself living in the upper Douro Valley, in the Douro Superior, which is near the border with Spain. People might know Porto. You go up the river all the way to Spain, and it's the sort of one of the most remote regions in Portugal, one of the hottest, one of the sort of harshest climates. But I sort of, living there, I fell in love with wine through the region, insofar that it's so intertwined with the culture, the way of living, the rhythms of everyday life. It's a lot more than just, it's a lot more than just a drink. So I think that is sort of my origin story, as in so much as working in the drinks industry. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the roots behind Cockburn and the Symington estate. So how did your journey with them begin?
So I originally worked with Symington as a copywriter when I first joined the company, and then began taking on brand management roles. And I worked with several of the brands in the portfolio before starting to work with Cockburn's in 2019. It was in 2020 where we launched the Tales of the Unexpected range, which was a sort of a departure from a lot of the work that Cockburn's had been doing before that, in so much as Cockburn's is largely focused on retail, particularly in the UK, but we wanted to create a sub-range that would work well in the on-trade and sort of broke the category rules in a certain extent and didn't drum on about it being port. It was more just about being a drink that people would like to work with in the on-trade. And I think it was in doing that project that we discovered that there was an appetite for that, and that there was sort of space in the market for a port brand that did things a bit differently.
Leading on from that, like when I think of port, traditionally it does evoke those sorts of, winter fireside moments. Very rarely do you think naturally of it being in a cocktail. So do you want to talk to us about reframing port as a liquid? Yeah,
well, I think the word sort of, I guess, reframing is a good one. It's not necessarily that we're trying to reinvent port. I think we're trying to show people that beyond the sort of traditional moment for port, there's also a way that we can reframe it as a drink to be enjoyed in other contexts. That traditional moment for port is all about people coming together. People have that idea of port as being, something at the end of a meal. People sit down around the table and they share a bottle of port, and it's a kind of a relaxed, informal moment. And I think that's not necessarily incompatible with the on-trade. And I think there's what we say with Cockburn's, we want Cockburn's to bring people together, whether that's around the table at the end of a meal, or leaning up against the bar with a cocktail in your hand. I think that's the crux of port, and it is a great drink for bringing people together. And a lot of people have fond memories of it precisely because of that sort of after dinner moment, be it of maybe not necessarily their generation but their parents, but they have fond memories of it, particularly in the UK, where it is a category that people still recognise even if they don't buy within that category.
I think what's really interesting is looking back into the past, and then coming forward and looking at what you're doing with even just the branding. So I'd be really interested to talk to you a little bit about the changes in the look of the bottle, and what's happening with that, and where's that come from?
Okay, so maybe I'm going to go back to the very beginning and sort of answer a bit of a question that you already asked in terms of the history of Cockburn's and how it started, because I think that informs a little bit what we're doing now in terms of branding and the way we're communicating. So, you know, Cockburn's is a family-owned company to this day, but it was founded by Robert and John Cockburn in 1815, and these two guys were wine merchants in Leith in Scotland. And one of them decided to up sticks and move to Porto to source, you know, the best possible wine he could. At that point, the way the sort of wine, the wine system worked there was that the merchants of various nationalities would be in Porto, and they would taste wines that were brought up from the Douro. They would decide which they wanted to buy the wine, and then ship it back to wherever they came from. The difference here was that John Cockburn went up the Douro Valley himself and sourced the wine direct from the farmers there in order to find you know, the best quality wines. And we have his letters from the time, and there's a quote we always pull out that says the quality of the wine, that is the most important thing. So even at that time they were sort of obsessed with that and doing things a little bit differently to manage that. And as time passed, Cockburn's would source wine from further and further inland until it was sourcing wine from up close to the border with Spain, much further inland than a lot of other port shippers were sourcing the wine. So they were continually sort of searching for better and better quality wine, and they identified that region, being, you know, hotter and more arid, produced more powerful wines, fuller bodied, denser tannins, etc. And so that's why they were more attracted to that region. So throughout the sort of 200-year history of the brand, we have these sort of moments in which it's seen doing things differently. We have the resurrection of the Touriga Nacional grape variety in the 1970s. So Touriga Nacional now is probably Portugal's most famous grape variety, but in the 70s it was on the verge of extinction, and it was Cockburn's viticulturalists that sort of brought it back through the, you know, experimental vineyards that were planting and made it popular again. And so, yeah, throughout the years you've had these several different instances of Cockburn's doing things differently. You had advertising in the 70s for Special Reserve that a lot of people will still remember to these days, because because it was quite for a port brand to be communicating in that fashion was quite strange. And so we felt that if there was a brand that could do things differently, it was Cockburn's. So that brings us sort of more or less to the modern day, and we felt that we had an opportunity to explore sort of different ways to package our wines. You know, we stand behind the liquid. The liquids are amazing. The 10-year-old TONIC, for example, is fantastic. But when we looked at the presentation, I felt it didn't sit right in sort of on a contemporary table. You know, what we wanted to do was you know, make a presentation that, you know, any consumer would be happy to bring to a friend's house, give them as a present, put it up on the table, and show it off. And we think it's paid off so far, and we've seen dividends in terms of sales and in terms of the awards that we've won for the packaging. You have a lot of new brands that are looking for authenticity. They're looking to prove that they're craft or they're artisan or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, you know, we have all this, and we've had it for 200 years. The grapes that are used to produce these wines are hand-picked on, you know, terraces carved into mountainside, in many cases, or in some cases by hand, and they're, you know, stored in oak vessels that are maintained by coopers whose families have been working in the industry for generations, and we have this. It exists, and it's what people are looking for in new brands, but not everyone can deliver that. We would always recommend that these ports are served chilled. You know, a 10-year-old, 20-year-old TONIC. Not everyone would say an LBV or a Special Reserve or a vintage port should be served chilled, but, you know, room temperature in my mind is not 22, it's 14, 15. And I think if you serve a wine that's been in the fridge for a couple of hours, it will quickly warm up to, you know, 10, 11, 12, and that for me is sort of a sweet spot. Another thing we've, you know, tried in events is white port over ice. You know, a big block of ice with a serve of white port over it is delicious. and a lot of people are quite surprised by that.
Do you think there are particular styles of port that lend themselves more or better to cocktail production?
The style of port that seems to be the most popular among sort of bartenders is a tawny port. You know, I would have thought that white port would be sort of the most versatile, the easiest to use, but I think there's sort of something that you know, bartenders look for in these wines that seems to be present in the tawny. I think it's some of those more complex aromas of oxidization, you know, the sort of the wood aged notes, and the sort of a crossover between whiskey to a certain extent. Obviously we don't have the alcohol, but we do have some of that sort of those flavors that a lot of people are looking for. I think it's something that so we launched a range of ports in 2019, 2020, sort of specially made for mixing. And I think, for example, what we did with the tawny was try and produce a liquid that, you know, showed tawny at its best. I think if you go to a 10-year-old tawny, you end up perhaps having, in some ways, too much oxidization for some bartenders. You lose the fruit, whereas this is sort of a perfect blend where you still have fruit in the mouth, but you also have sort of traces of oxidization coming through. So I think that works really well, and has been something that a lot of the bar guys work really well with this one. The white in the same range, again, it's sort of slightly drier than our standard white, but it's still a sweet wine, but it's quite aromatic, and it comes from higher altitude vineyards, so you've got that freshness that we don't have quite as much in our standard fine white. So this is part of a range we call Tales of the Unexpected, and it was released, you know, specifically to target the on-trade and specialist retail in some cases.
So tell me more about the concept of Tales of the Unexpected. Like, I understand what it's targeted for, but the name, even the label styles are very different.
Yeah, again, so we tried to produce something that, you know, broke the sort of a lot of the category rules for port. We really didn't want people to look at this and see port. We wanted to look at this and see something that would, you know, have pride of place on a back bar and feel at home in that environment. So, you know, we have this bottle that looks like a shaker. We have, again, a sort of an intricate illustration that shows some of the sort of idiosyncratic moments or people in the history of Cockburn's. And we just wanted to deliver a product that was unexpected. And that's where we came up with the name of the Tales. Obviously, Tales, T-A-I-L-S, as in, you know, tail feathers. That's the relationship with the cockerel. So that was where the sort of idea came from. And so it's a range of 3 wines. We've got a white, a tawny, and a ruby.
So is it difficult to balance the heritage of the brand with this push to modernity, or is it just a natural evolution?
I think it is difficult. I think, you know, the port category by its nature is slightly conservative. You know, it's a traditional category, and, you know, operates, you know, in some ways in the fine wine world. So, you know, by its nature, I think it is traditional. In saying that, I think there's appetite to, you know, to develop more interesting products and more contemporary products. I mean, you can't deny that. No one can deny that it doesn't make sense to do that, given what's going on in other categories and the sort of the constant search from the consumer of, you know, innovation, interesting products, niche products, and I think, you know, we need to address that.
What about the making? So has modern port making changed much behind the scenes? So whether in the vineyard, the cellar, or in how maybe you think about sustainability, or
yeah, I think very much so. I think that probably in terms of, you know, I'm not a winemaker and I'm not a viticulturalist, but I think in terms of how we work the land and how we produce the port, I think things have changed probably immensely in the last 40 or 50 years. Even if it's just, you know, probably looking back 50 years ago, most wine produced in the Douro was a field blend. You know, the varieties weren't planted in blocks, So you were harvesting and co-fermenting lots of different varieties. Nowadays, you know, a lot of the grapes produced in our vineyards will be planted by variety, which gives us much more control over the blends and the final blend. Then obviously technology in the vineyard has, you know, come on immensely. Temperature control, fermentation control, all that sort of thing has developed hugely over the years. So sustainability is hugely important, you know, and Symington Family Estates, Cockburn's is a B Corp, and sustainability is something that we take very seriously. Obviously climate change is impacting and is going to hugely impact the Douro as a region. It's already a region that, you know, doesn't have enough water. With global warming, we know that there are challenges coming. So I think it's something that's very important to us.
Do you want to just tell me a little bit about the connection between Cockburn's and the Symington Estates?
Symington Family Estates is the #1 producer of premium port in Portugal and owns a portfolio of brands including Cockburn's, Graham's, Dow's, Wars, and also some still wines. Recently, they've also acquired vineyards in the Vinho Verde region in the north of Portugal, Alentejo in the south, and in partnership with Berry Brothers and Rudd have also got a stake in Hambledon Vineyard in the south of England here. So Symington Family Estates sort of, I suppose, began in 1882 when Andrew James Symington, another Scotsman, came to Portugal to work in what was then Graham's Port. And sort of over the following 150 years, the Symington family would become more involved in the port trade and acquired several port houses like Dow's, Wars, Graham's, and then in 2011, if I'm not mistaken, Cockburn's. So Cockburn's was became part of the Symington Family Estates portfolio in 2011. Symington Family Estates is a B Corp, and obviously sustainability is a big part of what we do there and very important to all our brands. Not, I suppose, in small part due to the fact that the Douro region, where which is our home, it's already struggling with the effects of global warming. There's already very minimum amount of water, and you know, the hotter years can already be felt. So we know in the future that the region is going to be more impacted by global warming, and more the reason to work with sustainability.
What do you think is the biggest misconception, one of the biggest misconceptions about port, and how would you love people to reimagine it?
I suppose the biggest stereotype around port is that it's just for Christmas, and I think, you know, there's no reason to lock it up just for that one day a year. You know, people enjoy it at Christmas. There's no reason why you can't enjoy it on other days of the year, and not necessarily even special occasions. You know, it's a great wine to have any time of the year.
Well, I drink wine on a Friday night while I'm watching a film at home.
Great.
So
I'll judge you for that.
Thank you. For someone who's never tried port outside of a Christmas cheese port, where should they start?
I think, for me, I think a great point of entry to the category is something like this 10-year-old. I think if you serve this chilled out of the fridge, a lot of people who don't have experience of port will be sort of shocked. They won't. It won't be what they thought port was going to be like. A lot of people, if they've had experience of port, you know, it's generally a ruby port, an LBV, more probably a ruby or a reserve ruby. And when you hit them with something that's a little bit more, it's a different style. It's more oxidative. You've got more tertiary aromas. You know, people just aren't waiting for that. And I think serving it chilled also sort of gets them beyond. A lot of people say they don't like port because it's too sweet. But then when you give them that, they say they like it. And that's actually sweeter than a lot of reserve rubies because it's more concentrated. But I think when you serve it chilled, it sort of reduces the impact of the sugar in the wine and sort of allows people to concentrate a bit more on the actual flavours. So I think that's a great way into the category for a lot of people.
Okay. Do you see younger drinkers embracing port differently through food pairings, cocktails, or perhaps even in their travel experiences?
We are having success engaging with visitors to Porto. You know, Porto now is a sort of a tourist hub. We have lots of people coming from all around the world. We have our visitor centre open in Porto, where we see around 90,000 visitors a year. And through those people, I think we are able to engage with them and create, you know, brand ambassadors for our products, because a lot of people turn up at our doors having never had port, or only having a ruby port, and then when they see the sort of the variety of different styles and categories we offer, they get a better understanding of what it is we do. I think they also see the sort of the artisan, our craft nature of our sort of production methods out there, and I think that also makes them interested in the category, because I think a lot of people are also not quite sure how port is made. So when they have the experience of going out there, seeing it, learning a little bit about it, it allows them to sort of be a bit more confident when it comes to what wine they're going to drink here. So yeah, a visit to Porto wouldn't be complete without, you know, going into Cockburn's Lodge, obviously, and seeing the, you know, the vast stocks of wine we have there. I think we have about 9 million litres in total, and it's one of the largest lodges in Villanova de Gaia. We also have a team of in-house coopers who maintain all our casks, and we're the last port brand to keep an in-house team of coopers to maintain our stocks. Symington Family Estates is also going to open a wine bar, a restaurant, a sort of a new venue dedicated to our brands called Matriarca. A 3-story townhouse composed of a restaurant, a wine bar, a space for wine education, a terrace, a rooftop terrace, and a wine shop. So that'll be something to experience if you come in September.